supposed to be kind of like a guided experience. Hope you like it. You awaken with a shuddering gasp, torn violently from the grasp of oblivion. A suffocating weight presses down upon you, as if the very air conspires to drown you in its lifeless embrace. Your limbs are leaden, your mind a shattered mirror reflecting nothing but the fragments of formless dreams. As your senses creep back into awareness, sluggish and unwilling, you find yourself sprawled upon the barren wasteland, a place so devoid of warmth or life that it feels as though the world itself has forgotten this forsaken land. Your fingers claw weakly at the ground beneath you, scraping through cold ash and brittle bone. The wind, ceaseless and mournful, shrieks through the narrow chasms of stone, carrying with it a wailing dirge that echoes endlessly in the hollow spaces between your thoughts. The taste of dust and death clings to your lips, bitter and choking. You struggle upright, your muscles protesting with every movement, and it is then that you glimpse the remnants of the caravan, its broken, splintered remains scattered across the gorge. The sky above is a sickly, oppressive gray, casting no shadows and offering no warmth, only a perpetual, dead light that hangs like the last gasp of the dying sun. But it is not the ruins around you that hold your gaze. No, it is your own skin, pale and drawn, upon which are inscribed strange and unnatural runes, symbols that writhe as though alive, their meaning unfathomable. They glow faintly, pulsing with a rhythm not unlike that of a dying heartbeat, and you feel, deep within your soul, that these marks are not the product of mortal hands. You are no one. You are nothing. Only the gods know your name, and they are cruel gods, fickle and mad, who take pleasure in watching you crawl and suffer through the dust. Their presence lingers on the wind, and their laughter a faint but unmistakable sound that dances at the edge of your perception. Shivering, you stagger to your feet. The ground beneath you is littered with fragments of the past, with those who came before. You are not the first to tread this cursed land, but perhaps you are the last. Your eyes sweep across the desolate wreckage, a cemetery of splintered wood and once hopeful life, where the traces of long-dead lives have succumbed to the omnipresent decay. It is a wasteland, a realm where time itself has withered and died, leaving only ashen silence in its wake. And then, amidst the smothering gray dust, your gaze catches on something, a faint glint, barely visible and mostly buried beneath a mound of shifting ash. It gleams weakly, as if beckoning you to free it. Your limbs protest as you move toward it, each step a struggle, as though your bones themselves conspire against you to anchor you in place, resisting the very thought of motion. A bitter gale then scours the gorge, a low, mocking tone that carries the whispers of forgotten epochs, as if it alone knows the futility of your every action. Yet still, you kneel, the cold ground biting through your flesh, indifferent to your suffering. Your trembling fingers sift through the grit and decay, feeling the biting ash cling to your skin like the touch of a forgotten curse. And at last your hands find something beneath the dust, something old. You pull it free with deliberate care, brushing away the ash as though uncovering the dead from their clinging grave soil. And there, in your hands, lies a rusted axe, its once lethal blade dulled and mangled by the slow, insidious corrosion of untold years. The iron pitted and scarred, and the edge jagged and broken, a reflection of the countless battles it must have known. The handle brittle and splintering, seems as if it has long since forgotten the hands that once gripped it with fervor and strength. You turn the axe over in the pallid light, feeling the weight of it drag at your soul. It's a crude, barbarous thing, scarred by the time's insidious hand, yet, as your fingers close around its splintered grip, you feel something stir within, a memory that slithers through the empty halls of your mind like a dream half remembered. You've wielded such weapons before, though the when and where elude you, as though the knowledge has been buried beneath layers of lives you can no longer recall. The heft of it in your hand is too familiar and too intimate, like the touch of a revenant, a ghost of something long forgotten yet painfully known. A chill courses through you, one colder than the biting gale. This is not just a tool, but a relic of violence, of death. The metal hums faintly, as though it retains some echo of bloodshed, a lifeless thing heavy with the memory of savage purpose. You tighten your grip, the dull iron eager in your hand, almost as if the weapon itself remembers what it was made for, ready to feed once more. In this world of gray and death, it is all that stands between you and the shadows lurking at the edges of reality. Your eyes dart back and forth to the wreckage, scanning with a growing sense of unease. Something waits. Amidst the twisted remains of the shattered cart, another glimmer catches your attention. This one darker and duller, but no less laden with unseen significance. You drag yourself toward the object, your breath ragged, each inhale thin and fragile, as though the cold air itself has turned into shards of glass in your throat. Your fingers, stiff and unwilling, scrape through the tangled wreckage until they close around the thing half buried beneath the ashen rot. You pull it free with a trembling hand. A mace, its iron head scarred with the marks of some long-forgotten war, its surface slick with the grime of time and the rust of neglect. The leather wrapping on the grip is little more than a few brittle strands, mostly disintegrated, the remnants of a weapon left to die. Yet, as you hold it, the sensation that crawls up your arm is unnervingly familiar. The weight of the mace in your hand, solid, cold, and so very real, grounds you. But what grips your insides with a sense of sickly dread is the realization that the violence they promise is not new either. There is no hesitation. There can be none in this place. The weight of the axe and the dented head of the mace, these are now your only companions, the last vestiges of a forgotten life, and the sole tools of your survival. You cradle them as though they are pieces of your soul, salvaged from the ashes of this forsaken world, a world that has long since abandoned the ideas of mercy and compassion. These weapons, crude and broken, are the only things that stand between you and the nameless horrors that surely await within the shadows of this dying land. You rise, your legs trembling and your body groaning in protest as though it would rather sink into the ashen ground than face what comes next. The wind gnashes its teeth through the canyon once more, carrying with it the frigid breath of something angered and unseen, its icy claws raking across your skin. You glance around, your eyes darting from shadow to shadow, searching the wreckage for something, anything more. And there, fluttering weakly in the wind, clinging to the remains of a shattered cart's wheel, a cloak. It sways lazily, as though waiting for you, as if it has been waiting for years. And there, fluttering weakly in the wind, clinging to the remains of a shattered cart's wheel, a cloak. It sways lazily, as though waiting for you, as if it has been waiting for years. You stagger toward it, each step an ordeal, every gust of wind tearing through you. The fabric is rotted and brittle, its once rich texture now little more than rags, but when you pull it free, it offers a kind of fragile comfort. You pull it over your shoulders, and the rough material scraping against your skin, creating a thin barrier between you and the world. The cloak hangs in tatters, its once strong fabric reduced to little more than a shroud of what it once was. But still, it feels like armor, and offers some makeshift protection against the relentless cold. You pull the hood low over your face, casting your features into shadow. The wind howls again, but this time it seems to recede, as though acknowledging your defiance, unwilling to challenge you further. You glance down at yourself, the weapons clenched in your hands and the tattered cloak draped over your shoulders. A wretch, you think. a mere shell of something that once might have been human. Yet, in this moment, and despite everything, you feel a trace of purpose, however faint. It flickers like a dying flame in your chest, slipping away as quickly as it comes, but it is there. Something stirs within you, something primal. You stand in the ruins of the caravan, clutching your wretched tools and feeling the reality of this moment. This land is not dead, but neither is it alive. It is something in between, suspended in a slow and terrible transformation. It watches, and it waits, and so too must you. And then, from deep within the wind's cruel breath, you feel it. Eyes, cold, unblinking, fixed upon you. You are being watched. The presence lingers just beyond your sight, observing your every movement. You turn slowly, your gaze sweeping the cragged landscape. The cliffs rise on either side of you like the broken ribs of some colossal beast. At first, there is nothing, only the bones, the ruin, and the unrelenting silence. But then, far off in the distance, where the ash is thickest and the shadows seem to writhe like living things, a figure emerges. It is tall, unnaturally so. Its limbs grotesquely elongated, and its body a monstrosity of sinew and bone held together by skin stretched too tightly over its brittle frame. Its skull-like face is devoid of flesh, empty sockets glowing with a faint and sickly light. Across its chest and abdomen, black, cancerous growths pulse and throb, obscene tumors clinging to its body like vile parasites, as though they are alive in a way the creature no longer is. The wind shrieks, tearing at your cloak, but the thing moves in utter silence. Its movements are jerky and disjointed, its head snapping unnaturally from side to side as it fixes its empty gaze upon you. The air around you seems to grow colder, like the presence of this thing is siphoning the warmth from the very earth beneath its feet. And for a moment, you are frozen, paralyzed by the sight of it. The thing claws at your mind, its form an abomination that defies reason, something that shouldn't be, something that cannot be, and yet it is here. It is real. And then it lurches forward, its limbs dragging behind it like the broken strings of a marionette. Its movement is unnervingly fast, its joints bending at angles that should not be allowed for such speed and abomination. Something that exists outside the boundaries of life and death. The stench hits you like a physical blow, a reeking foulness of rot and decay, a stink that fills your lungs with the promise of death. Bile rises in your throat and the creature closes the distance between you. Without thought, driven by nothing more than instinct, you raise the rusted axe. The weight of it pulls at you, as though the weapon itself wishes to drag you into the abyss alongside this thing. But you force yourself to hold firm. Your fingers tremble on the splintered handle as the creature grows closer, and it strikes. One of its grotesque, sinew-wrapped claws sweeps towards you with a terrifying speed. You twist out of the way, feeling the chill of its passing brush your face like the breath of a grave. Your heart hammers in your chest and the wind howls in your ears, but you retaliate, swinging the axe with all of your strength. The blade bites into the creature's shoulder with a sickening crunch of bone, but it does not fall. The creature howls and scrambles back, dragging your embedded axe with it. Its hollow eyes remain fixed on you with an inhuman hunger. From its chest, one of the bulbous tumors ruptures, spewing a thick black bile that splatters the ground. The stench is overwhelming, a vile odor of rancid blood and rotting flesh, and the sight of the bile sizzling as it eats into the earth makes your vision swim. Desperation claws at your thoughts. You leave the axe and raise the mace, your last hope. The heavy weapon lumbers through the ash-laden air and connects with the creature's jaw. The impact shatters the lower half of its skull, sending shards of bone skittering across the ground. But still the creature does not fall. It staggers, its body shaking with unnatural spasms, but it keeps moving, its broken form still relentless. With a fear-driven surge of strength, you raise the mace once more, your body screaming in protest. And then you bring it crashing down on the creature's skull. The iron shatters its head with a deafening crack, the sound of crushed bone reverberating through the canyon. The creature spasms where it stands, its limbs jerking in a grotesque dance of death, and then it collapses, twitching on the ground as black bile oozes from its body. And for a long moment you simply stand there, breathless. You pull the rusted axe free and it trembles in your grip. The creature lies before you, a heap of limbs and dark ichor pooling at your feet. And then silence. And the wind, which had stilled in those brief, horrific moments, resumes its mournful wail, as though it had been holding its breath. The gorge is still, save for the faint rustling of ash that swirls in the air. But as the husk dissolves into the landscape, a feeling settles over you, omnipotent, malevolent. The land is not done with you yet. The gods are watching, and they are waiting. The wind in the gorge never ceases. It wails through the jagged cliffs, not with the monotonous persistence of nature, but with a mournful sentience, as if the land itself were alive and dying. Perhaps each gust is a ragged breath, the last exhalation of a world abandoned to madness and decay. It fills the air with an unrelenting howl, a symphony of despair woven into the fabric of the landscape itself. You press forward, step by agonizing step, your legs heavy with fatigue. The weapons hang loosely in your hands, the axe still sticky with the clotted filth of the thing you felled not long ago, the husk, if it could even be called a creature of this world. Its body had crumbled into black dust before your eyes, collapsing into nothing, but its stench still lingers, clinging to your skin like the foul breath of a forgotten tomb. As you move, the earth beneath your feet shifts with subtle malice. The land resents your presence here. Your mind churns with questions that gnaw at your sanity like an invisible vermin. What is this place? Why were you abandoned among the wreckage of that doomed caravan, left to awaken in a layer of ash with only the cold touch of death nearby? The gorge, bleak and alien as it is, still feels familiar, but not in any way that could offer comfort. There is no comfort here. It is more like the faint memory of a distant nightmare, its meaning buried beneath layers of forgotten horrors, its edges blurred and shifting. As you wind your way deeper into the gorge's gaping maw, you feel a change in the air, subtle at first. The wind, already biting, grows sharper still, slicing through your ragged cloak like a blade of ice. There's something else now, something faint but undeniable, another presence. It clings to the air like smoke, like a warning murmured by an unseen mouth. You stop, and your muscles tense, every fiber of your being taut with anticipation. You have already seen what crawls in these shadows, already know what abominations this cursed place can bring forth. But the shadows hold still, for now. And then there, a flicker of movement in the distance, a figure barely visible, slipping between the jagged stones like a shadow caught in half light. Your heart lurches and your mind's recoiling at the thought that it could be another one of those grotesque lurching monstrosities, another husk, or worse, something that has crawled from deeper within the earth. But as the figure shifts into clearer view, your eyes narrow. This one is different. It moves upright, its steps deliberate, measured. It seems human. or something wearing the shape of one. Your fingers tighten around your axe, the grip slick with grime, but you refuse to hesitate. There is no space for second thoughts here, no time for doubt, and you press forward. Your movements are deliberate, each step sinking into the shifting ash beneath you. The figure disappears behind a series of towering stones, crooked like the broken teeth of some long-dead titan, forgotten even by the gods. You follow, the cold wind tearing at the back of your neck, sending a shiver down your spine, but not from the cold, from the prickling sense of unseen eyes watching from the shadows. Whoever this figure is, they are not alone. As you approach the stones, you slow, your breath catching. You peer around the edge of a jagged outcrop, and your heart pounding in your chest, your body still. And there, in the hollow beyond, you see it, a campfire. The flame is pitiful, barely clinging to life, flickering in the wind's grasp. But it is a fire nonetheless. Around it, huddled in tattered cloaks, sit 3 figures. They are filthy, their faces smeared with ash and grime, their bodies gaunt, nothing but skin stretched too tightly over their brittle bones. Their heads are bowed, and their faces hidden in the shadow of the fire. The wind cuts through the gorge, but these 3 seem untouched, their thin cloaks barely stirring against the cold. They are like wraiths, more dead than alive. They have not seen you. You stay still, hidden among the craggy rocks. Your eyes lock onto the figures before you. Something about them feels wrong, as though they don't truly belong here, as though they too are watching and waiting. Their eyes are vacant and their postures slack. Whatever spark of life had once driven them has long since drained away, leaving behind only husks of humanity, empty shells devoid of purpose, devoid of soul. And yet, they are not like the husks you have encountered before. One of them, a gaunt man, stares straight ahead. His eyes, wide and sunken deep into his skull, glow with an unnatural light, piercing. Beside him, a woman, her skin as pale as the ash-cloaked air, stares into the weak flame, as though pleading with gods long forgotten. The flames flicker weakly, and if they hear her, they refuse to answer. But the third figure, the third one sees you. A weathered man clutches a wooden staff in his bony fingers. The surface of the staff is etched with crude symbols that seem to shift unnervingly in the dim firelight, undulating as though the wood itself rebels against the markings. The staff trembles in his grip. His knuckles are white with the desperate effort of holding it. When his eyes meet yours, it feels as though your very essence is being sifted through, as if your existence has been acknowledged long before you even knew it, predicted, anticipated. With sudden motion he rises. The frailty of his withered form belies the unnatural swiftness. The others remain fixated on the fire. "Another one," the man rasps, his voice like the scraping of bone on stone. It sounds as though the words have been dredged up from some crumbling tomb, his throat dry and brittle from disuse, as if the act of speech itself is an unwelcome burden. His lips curl into a grotesque semblance of a grin. "The gorge has delivered us another one." You say nothing. Words feel dangerous here, irrelevant in the presence of such unnatural forces. Your grip tightens around your weapons, the axe and mace suddenly heavier. You remain waiting and watching. The man with the staff steps forward, his movements now more purposeful, each step infused with a strange reverence like he's crossing some sacred boundary. He holds the staff out before him, not in threat, but as if presenting an offering. The symbols etched into its surface seem to squirm and undulate in the flickering firelight, relics of an older age, inscribed with the malice of something far, far older, far darker. As he grows nearer, the symbols glow faintly, their shapes stirring something in the deep recesses of your mind, a feeling you cannot grasp, buried beneath the layers of the forgotten past. His eyes drift to the ruins etched into your skin, lingering on the marks as if they hold secrets he knows. He recognizes them. "You carry the mark," he says, and though the wind howls through the gorge, his voice cuts through it like a chisel carving into stone. "You are one of the cursed, like us." The word cursed slithers into you like a bent and barbed hook, and a familiar unease coils beneath your skin. You feel it worm its way through your veins, venomous and sickening. You meet his gaze but remain silent, your body now tense. The unease pulls at you and begins drawing you forward despite the screaming of your instincts to stay. You take a single step closer, morbid intrigue gnawing at you like a parasite. Your voice, when it finally comes, is a hoarse rasp dredged from the depths. "What do you mean?" The man with the staff smiles, but it is not a smile born of joy, or rather, it is a mockery of the gesture, reminiscent of the twitch from a fresh corpse's lips. "We have been granted mercy, a different path. We are the devoted, those who serve the gods willingly rather than struggle against their will. You do not need to suffer any longer. Join us, and you too can be freed from this endless cycle." His words slide over you like oil, tempting in their smoothness, but tainted with something foul, something wrong. Freedom from the cycle. And what does he mean? The price, your mind whispers, would be far too high, far more than you should ever pay. You search his face for malice, for the deceit of a fanatic, but what you find is worse. Certainty. He truly believes what he says. "What is it you serve?" you ask, the question slipping from your lips before you can stop it. Your doubt, though not yet spoken aloud, is demanding answers. The man steps forward, his voice rising with fervor, an obscene hunger shining in his eyes. "We serve the immortal ones, those who watch from the shadows, those who rule from beyond. We are their chosen. They have freed us from the endless suffering of this world. We no longer fight. We no longer endure the pain of existence. We are at peace." You eye him warily, your grip tightening on the haft of your axe, as though the touch of the cold iron could somehow ward off the taint that hangs in the air around him. You could turn away now. You could leave them to their madness, their pathetic fire, and their cursed worship. But something in you refuses to leave. Perhaps it is the lure of answers, or perhaps something darker, maybe more morbid, the need to peel back the layers of this rotting world and see what is festering beneath. The man raises his staff high, his eyes wide with fervor, his voice trembling with the weight of his belief. "Kneel before our gods, stranger, and cast off the chains of your endless torment. Become one of us, the devoted, or continue to suffer, to writhe in agony of your futile existence. There is no other way." Your hands tighten further around the axe and the mace. Kneel before the gods. The very thought sends a wave of revulsion through you. The man doesn't step closer, merely watching you with that same twisted mask of peace. His gaze is not malicious. There is no anger in his eyes, only a deep, warped certainty, as though he truly believes he is offering you salvation. His grip on the staff trembles slightly, and in that moment you realize the truth. He clings to it, and not from fear of you, but from some inner tension, as though holding it keeps him anchored to his dark purpose. They are not dead, he continues, his voice lowering with a soft, seductive murmur, like the whisper of a spider. Not truly. They have descended the pain of this world, the pain that still clings to you. They are with the gods now, closer than you or I could ever hope to be. His eyes flicker with a strange, almost reverent glow, the light from the fire reflecting off of his pale skin in an unsettling way. This is their gift. You take a slow step back. The woman and the silent man. They aren't alive. They never were. You take another step, your eyes darting between the figures that surround the fire. Their skin is also drawn tight over their bodies. Their limbs are stiff and curled inward, like an unborn fetus. They sit like statues, propped up beside the flame, their postures unnervingly still. They are with me, the man with the staff says, as if reading your thoughts. His voice drips with satisfaction, too close to glee. He does not look at his companions, and doesn't need to. He knows. Their devotion has been completed. They are the chosen, and I, their shepherd. A wave of nausea rises in your throat. There's nothing left to guide. These are corpses, shells of something once human left to rot from within. The woman's head tilts slightly, her lips possibly move, her eyes wide, locked in some eternal reverence, and the silent man, his grin remains, but his body is still, too still. And you, the man says, his voice softening, almost pleading, you are still suffering. I see it in your eyes, the weight of endless death, the curse that binds you to this wretched place. It doesn't have to be this way. The gods. He raises his staff once more, the carvings flickering in the dim light. They can free you, just as they have freed them. He takes a step closer, his eyes filled with pity, looking at you like you were the one who was lost. Let them take the burden from you, end the struggle. You could find peace. There is no deception. He believes every word, and that makes it worse. He truly thinks this is salvation, this impotent existence, this frozen state between oblivions. And yet his eyes plead with you, not for your death, but for your understanding, for you to see the truth as he does, that this is the only release. But for reasons you don't yet understand, you know you can never kneel, not to these gods. You steady your breath, the wind rising to a furious wail as though the gorge itself reacts to the tension, a voice screaming through the chasms of stone. The man, this thing that calls itself devoted, watches you with that haunting calm, his pale, withered face bathed in the flickering light of the dying fire. No. You say, your voice firm, cutting through the swirling tempest, this isn't peace. You glance once more at the hollowed figures beside him, their forms rigid, and I won't join them. The man lowers his staff, slowly, almost ritualistically, his shoulders sagging beneath the weight that seems far older than his fragile body. He makes no move to stop you, raises no hand in anger or warning. Instead, he gazes at you with a kind of serene acceptance, the fervor in his eyes dimming like the last embers of a dying flame, his lips pressed together, but not in malice, but in disappointment, the look of one who has offered a gift, a mercy, only to have it cast aside. It's a look that chills you more than any threat could. This man, this thing, it has seen this rejection before. He knows it will happen again. I thought you might say that, he murmurs, his voice thick with something that might be regret, though it's tainted by an air of inevitability. His gaze drifts towards the motionless corpses beside him, and for a moment, his fingers trace the symbols carved into his staff. Something passes over his expression, a shadow of what might have once been sorrow, or perhaps something darker. Not everyone can see the gift for what it is. You're not ready yet. His pale eyes return to you, their light distant and cold, like the gleam of a dead star. But in time, you will be. You say nothing, and step past him. Your every sense is alert, waiting for him to strike, but he only watches, his head tilting slightly, studying you with a kind of detached curiosity, like one might watch the inevitable collapse of a falling building. As you reach the edge of the camp, ready to slip into the shadows of the gorge, his voice calls out again, softer this time, almost casual, like parting words shared between old acquaintances. If you continue through the gorge, you'll find something you can use. The sound of his staff tapping against the ground echoes strangely against the rock, a dull, hollow note that lingers for far too long in the air. The gods, they leave things behind for those who struggle. Relics, perhaps, from those who came before you. Some may help you, and some may do worse. But they're there, waiting. You pause, your back still turned to him. He's letting you go. There's no hostility in this release, no bitterness, only the belief that you too will one day see things as he does. Perhaps in his eyes, your refusal is merely part of some grand, cosmic path. He offers a final nod, as though sealing the moment. Take what you find, if it pleases you. The gods do not deny those who seek. He sighs, a sound heavy with resignation, and turns his back to you, returning to the flickering light of the dying fire. His fingers continue to trace the repetitive patterns over the surface of his staff, as though the motion itself holds some deeper significance to him, perhaps a silent prayer, an invocation. His dead companions remain still, their heads bowed and their posture frozen in eternal reverence. The wind howls through the gorge again, a mournful cry that echoes off the cliffs, and you turn your back on the camp. The flickering light of the fire dims as you move away, swallowed by the crooked rock and the creeping shadow that stretch between them. Whatever treasures or curses the man spoke of lie somewhere ahead, relics left by those who once walked this land before you, or by the gods you defy. As the canyon walls close in around you, the shadows thickening, you cannot shake the sense that perhaps the man was right about one thing. The gods are watching. They always have been. The thought lingers as you press forward into the deeper, darker veins of the gorge, where the land itself seems to pulse with something living, something that has been waiting for you all along. The canyon seems to stretch on forever, as if it has no end. The wind is howling ceaselessly, carrying the scent of ash and something far worse, rot and decay and the stale breath of a world forgotten. Your limbs ache, but you press forward. Each step feels heavier than the last. The walls of the bleak stone gorge rise on either side of you, sharp and uneven. The further you go, the narrower the path becomes. The ground here is cracked and uneven, littered with broken stone and rubble of waged battles. Scattered bones lay half buried in the dust, picked clean by time and wind. Whatever life once roamed here has long since fled or been devoured. But something keeps you moving forward, some instinct driving you deeper into the canyon, toward whatever awaits. There is no peace in this place. You rejected the man with the staff, but now, as you walk through this god-forsaken gorge, you wonder if you've only delayed the inevitable. Soon you find yourself at the foot of a large wall whose face is flat and smooth, like a wall of a bedroom. And on the wall are carvings. At first, they're barely noticeable, simple marks scratched into the stone of the gorge. But as you get closer, you realize they are not the work of random hands. The carvings are deliberate, precise, symbols and images etched deep into the rock. They spiral upward, winding along the canyon wall like a great cosmic tapestry. You stop, tracing one with your finger. The stone is cool beneath your touch, but there is something faint. A thrum, a distant hum of power. The symbols are unfamiliar, but their meaning is clear. This place is not just a graveyard for forgotten lives. It is a shrine, an altar to something greater. The carvings depict a towering figure, a godlike entity with a misshapen, elongated form looming over the canyon. Its eyes are like empty voids, and its outstretched hands seem to grasp at the land below, as if claiming it for its own. Beneath the figure, countless humans bow, their heads bent low, as if offering themselves in sacrifice. Some of the people's forms deform and distort as they rise from the ground, becoming something else, something monstrous. Their limbs grow thin, their faces hollow, their eyes wide with eternal hunger. GorgeBound Husks. You step back, your heart pounding in your chest. The carvings show the transformation clearly, as if it were a blessing, but you know better. The god depicted here is not benevolent. It is a force of entropy, decay. It does not grant salvation. It molds life into abomination. As you move further down the canyon, more signs of the god's influence appear. Strange idols buried in the dust, their forms worn smooth by the relentless wind. The idols are crude representations of the god, tall, thin figures with skeletal limbs and yawning empty mouths. They stand like sentinels, watching over the dead, and their faces locked in expressions of cold indifference. And then you see it. A stone altar, cracked and ruined, jutting out of the canyon floor like a jagged wound. Scattered around it are the remains of others who came before you, bones picked clean, their flesh long since devoured. But there's something else, something recent. A corpse lies slumped over the altar, its body decaying and broken, half turned to stone. Black, bulbous growths beat along its spine, crawling up towards its skull, the same growths that marked the GorgeBound Husks. The body is still fresh and the transformation not yet complete, but you can see the outline of what it was becoming, a monster, its humanity lost to the god's will. You take a step back, bile rising in your throat. This is the god's doing. It takes those who wander too far into the gorge and warps them into its disfigured children. It offers no mercy or nor freedom, only oblivion. The GorgeBound are not just the cursed, they are the claimed. Claimed by this god, the unseen force that presides over the canyon like a vulture circling a dying animal, waiting for the moment to strike. You hear a faint rustling behind you. Something moves in the shadows. You know what it is before you even turn. Another husk. It leaps towards you without a moment's hesitation, its empty gaze locked on you. The black growths along its chest cramp faintly, the only sign of life left in it. But the carvings have told you the truth. There is once human life here, but only a mockery of it. This creature was once man, but it has been consumed by the god's will, cast into something barely recognizable. You raise your axe, but even as you prepare for the fight, the revelation sinks deeper. The gorge is a place of transformation, and the god that rules over it watches with snide indifference, turning those who fall into its realm into its own grotesque creations. When the husk is in range, you swing the axe, feeling the familiar crunch of bone beneath the blade. But this time it's different. And this time you know what this creature was, and what it once hoped to be. And you know that, in the end, this fate may come for you as well, because the god of the gorge is patient. You have killed the husk, split its skull with a familiar crack, but it leaves you no satisfaction. The truth isn't lost on you. It's almost heavier than the weapons in your hands. You feel like the gorge is closing in around you, the space between the walls stretching as the distant sun begins to sink beneath the horizon. There is no time to linger, not with the god's gaze heavy on your back, and not with the knowledge of what this land has in store for those who wander through the night. Ahead, the ground slopes downward, and the sharp cliffs of the gorge slowly give way to something else. The stone is smoother here, more deliberate, and carved. You notice the telltale signs of a passage, a stairway cut into the rock, crumbled and overgrown with moss, descending into the earth. Your breath catches in your throat, and this must be it. The HollowMarrow Crypts, the burial site hinted at in the ruins, the place where the bones of the forgotten civilization lie in silence. Or worse. You descend the stairs slowly, your grip tightening around the axe as the last light of the sun fades behind you. The air is different here. It's heavier. It smells of rot and damp earth, thick and stagnant, as if the place hasn't been disturbed in centuries. Each step echoes faintly off the stone walls, and the sound swallowed quickly by the depths below. The passage narrows as you go, and the air growing colder and more stifling, pressing down on you as if the weight of the world above seeks to crush you. At the bottom of the stairway, you step into the first chamber of the HollowMarrow Crypts. It is massive, its ceilings high and vaulted, supported by columns etched with forgotten symbols. The walls are lined with alcoves, each one containing the remains of long-dead figures, and skeletons dressed in tattered robes, their bones yellowed with age, ancient kings and priests, warriors. Their faces are gone, but their legacy remains, entombed in the stone. The sound of dripping water fills the chamber, and the dim light from behind barely reaches these walls, casting long shadows to dance in turn. You take a moment to pause, listening, but the only sound is the quiet drip, drip of water echoing through the empty crypt. You move forward again, careful not to disturb the bones resting in the alcoves. This place feels untouched, yet these bones tell you that you are not the first to wander here, and the walls feel closer here. Too close. The ceiling feels like it's closing in. As you move deeper into the crypt, you notice something. A faint glow far ahead, at the end of the chamber. It's a soft, pale green light that flickers not unlike that of a torch. Your stomach tightens. In a place like this, no light should exist at all. And yet, it does. You approach cautiously, your fingers tightening on your weapon, and as you draw closer, the source of the light comes into view. At the center of a new chamber, an altar rises from the ground, its stone surface slick with moisture. Atop the altar, a torch burns with unnatural light, casting the room in the same eerie green glow. Beside the altar, something shifts, small. A faint movement ahead. You grab the torch with your free hand, noticing it feels completely weightless. The torch itself also seems to bear no heat. Taking a moment, you then decide to wave the torch, testing the strength of the flame. After a short while, and despite your best efforts, you conclude that the flame cannot be extinguished. You keep the torch in your offhand and press on, delving deeper into the HollowMarrow Crypt. The stairway beneath the gorge leads you deeper than you expected. The walls are near your shoulders, and damp with condensation. Each step echoes louder than the last, and the oppressive silence only broken by the sound of your breath and the occasional drip of unseen water. At the base of the stairs, you step into a narrow corridor. The walls are lined with alcoves, each containing the remains of the long-dead, their bones resting in solemn silence. Skulls peer at you from their resting places, and their empty stares judging your intrusion. The passage feels like it has not been disturbed for centuries, and yet you cannot shake the feeling that you are being watched. The crypt itself seems alive with a dormant energy. You push forward, but you know something is down here with you. You can feel it. As you move deeper into the crypt, the passage opens into a small, vaulted chamber. Statues of forgotten kings and priests stand along the walls, their once regal forms defiled by time. Your torch casts flickering light across the stone, but it struggles against the intense darkness, revealing nothing of the room's far corners. And then you hear it. A faint skittering sound, like claws scraping lightly against the stone. The noise is soft but persistent, coming from somewhere just beyond the torchlight. Your breath catches in your throat as you slowly turn, scanning the chamber, and the noise stops. Your eyes search the darkness, and then, just beyond the range of the torchlight, something again moves. The figure shifts in one of the alcoves. You raise the torch higher, the light flickering and straining to reach the corners of the room. Something small emerges from the shadows, and at first you mistaken it for a large rat, but as it scurries into the dim light, you see it for what it is. The creature is child-sized, hunched and wrinkled, with large, bulging eyes that gleam in the flickering torchlight. Its flesh hangs loosely from its flesh, torn and frayed in places. Its long, thin limbs end in sharp, yet small claws that scrape softly against the stone floor as it moves. It skitters to the edge of the room, pausing there, its oversized eyes fixed on you. For a moment, it is still, watching, and waiting. Then, to your horror, it begins to tear away its own skin. Its claws slice through the loose flesh hanging from its body, peeling it back in long, wet strips, revealing fresh layers of raw muscle and veins beneath. The discarded skin falls to the floor in a heap, wet and glistening. The creature stares at you as it sheds, as though offering you a grotesque display of its nature, and then in a blur of movement it darts back into the shadows, leaving only the pile of sloughed-off skin behind. You hesitate as the silence stretches on, the crypt growing eerier with each passing moment. You take several steps forward and your foot hits something soft, and you glance down and realize that it's the discarded skin lying in a pool at your feet. The skittering sound returns, circling the chamber. Now it's coming from all directions at once. The creature is toying with you. You raise your axe, muscles tense, ready for the next attack, but it doesn't come from where you expect. Instead, the sound grows louder and multiplies. Your pulse quickens. The soft scrape of claws against stone now echoes from every corner of the chamber, overlapping as though the darkness itself has come alive. The realization crashes over you like a wave. It is not alone. Your torch flickers, casting erratic shadows on the walls, and in the dancing light, you see them. More of them. Skinshedders? 3, 4, no, half a dozen. Emerging from the cracks and alcoves in the stone, their sinewy forms crawling along the floor and the ceilings like rats spilling out of a burrow. Their eyes reflect the torchlight, black and bulging, each one locked onto you with a ravenous hunger. Their bodies twist and shift, loose skin hanging from their frames as they scurry closer, their claws scraping at the floor, pulling their malformed bodies towards you. As they move, you see some of them tear away their skin, ripping it free in long, glistening strips. Their raw, new flesh writhing with unnatural vitality. The smell of rotting meat fills the air, thick and cloying. The chamber feels smaller with every passing moment. The walls, once wide and imposing, are now closing in, yet again trapping you with these grotesque creatures. You glance around, heart pounding, realizing you are completely surrounded. The skittering intensifies as they inch closer, their movements erratic and unpredictable. One of them darts forward faster than you can react, its claws outstretched, aiming for your legs. You swing your axe down, the blade catching its side with a sickening crunch, but just as before, its skin peels away, leaving nothing but a hollow husk crumpled at your feet. The real creature is gone, already blending into the shadows with the others. More skins. Wet, limp and discarded, litter the ground, making the chamber a fetid battlefield of hollowed flesh. Another Skinshedder charges, and this time from above. You spin, swinging your torch upward, the flame grazing its exposed flesh. It screeches, a high-pitched, inhuman sound that echoes through the crypt. But then, the sound is joined by others. Many others. You whirl around and they're closing in. Their gleaming eyes reflect the flickering light, and the scrape of their claws against the stone becomes deafening, as though the crypt itself is alive with their movements. There's no time to count them now, only time to act. One leaps from the shadows, claws outstretched, and this time you're ready. Your axe strikes true, cutting deep into the raw, exposed flesh. It lets out a keening wail, collapsing to the ground, but the others don't stop. They don't hesitate. Another lunges, and another, each one tearing at its own skin as it attacks, leaving behind empty husks, while the true form darts back and forth in the dark, waiting for the next opportunity. The crypt is a blur of movement now, the air thick with the scent of blood and the stench of shed flesh. The Skinshedders are relentless, and their numbers overwhelming, their tactics unnerving and confusing. Each strike you land feels like a temporary victory, each kill is met with a new attack from the shadows. Your breath comes in ragged gasps, and your muscles are screaming with effort, but you cannot stop. And suddenly, the Skinshedders freeze, their gleaming eyes wide with sudden terror. They stop their frantic skittering, abandoning their attack, and their heads jerk upward in unison, drawn to something beyond you. Their shrill squeals fade into uneasy silence, and their spindly limbs pull them further into the shadows, as though trying to vanish completely. Something worse is coming. A deep, wet sniffing sound echoes down the corridor from behind you. A sharp intake of breath, followed by the faintest sound of claws scraping against stone. The Skinshedders cower in their alcoves, their usual erratic movement halted by sheer fear. Whatever is approaching, it has unnerved even these vile creatures. You slowly turn, torch raised, and your breath catches in your throat, and from the darkness you hear the soft dragging of claws, and then the unmistakable sound of something sniffing the air again. It's close. You back away from the discarded skins and the trembling Skinshedders, trying to track the source of the noise, but the shadows are deep and your torchlight flickers weakly. From the far end of the chamber, it appears, a shape moving low to the ground, just barely visible in the wavering light. It is smaller than you'd imagined, only about 5 feet tall, but its presence is overwhelming. Its body is nothing but sinew and muscle, tightly wound and glistening in the dim light. It has no eyes, only a smooth, skinless face that seems to shift as it moves, its exposed teeth gnashing together in a soundless, anticipatory snarl. It sniffs the air again, the scent of torn flesh from the Skinshedders filling its lungs, and it lets out a low, hungry growl that reverberates through the crypt. The Skinshedders tremble, backing even further into the shadows, their usual bravado erased in the presence of their superior predator. The creature moves quickly now, its long, clawed arms dragging across the stone, leaving thin scratches. It's faster than you expected, its movements fluid, a natural-born hunter. It stops but a few feet away, head tilting slightly as it sniffs again, and its senses lock on to the lingering scent of blood and fear. It doesn't see you, but it knows you're there. You take a slow step back, but the creature is already on the move. It darts forward with terrifying speed. The torchlight flickers as it circles you, always sniffing, always seeking. In the shadows, the Skinshedders continue to retreat, their bodies pressing tightly against the alcoves. But they aren't fleeing, not yet. They're waiting, watching as the creature stalks closer to you, its claws flexing and its mouth gaping open, a low hiss escaping its throat. You raise your axe again, but before you can strike, the creature lunges. Its claws rake across your arm, sharp pain exploding up your limb as its talons slice through flesh. You stagger back, swinging your torch toward it, the flame casting erratic shadows against the crypt walls. The creature hisses, retreating slightly, but it doesn't stop. It's waiting for a moment, for you to drop your guard. It thrives on the hunt, and it's feeding on your fear. Your breathing is ragged, and the wound on your arm burns with fresh blood, dripping onto the stone floor. The creature stops for a moment, its head snapping toward the ground where the droplets fall. Another deep sniff, and its mouth opens wider, teeth glistening as the scent of blood triggers something primal in it. Its cautious circling gives way to an overwhelming instinct, and you know it's about to strike. You grip your axe tightly, but doubt seeps into your thoughts. The creature's too fast, it's too focused. You can't flee, not here. In these tight corridors, there's no running from this. Desperation races through your mind. Running isn't an option, but neither is dying here. You glance again at the discarded skins of the Skinshedders littering the ground, and then back at the creature. You shift your weight, drawing the mace strapped to your side, its heavy weight comforting in your hand. An idea, a horrid and repulsive idea, creeps into your mind. It sickens you, but desperation leaves no room for revulsion. You kneel quickly, the stench of the discarded skin slamming into your senses as you reach out, hands trembling. The skins are wet, cold to the touch, and slippery, yet you force yourself to wrap them around your body. Each layer clings to you like the damp remnants of death itself, the slime soaking through your clothing, staining your skin with their very stink. You can hear the soft squelch of the skins as you pull the last piece over your shoulders, the slimy flesh settling around you. Your breath tries to quicken as the nausea builds in your gut, but you suppress it, forcing yourself to stillness. The creature's head snaps up, and for a moment, it hesitates. Its eyeless face tilts as it tries to reconcile the mismatched scent, but the confusion is fleeting. The creature's hunger will override its caution, and you know you must act now. You raise the mace, gripping your weapon more tightly. The creature lunges, claws flashing in the dim torchlight, but this time you stand your ground. You step toward the swing, and with all the strength you can muster, you swing the heavy iron ball on the end of the mace into the creature's ribcage. The impact is brutal. You feel the jarring crunch of bone beneath the blow, and the creature lets out a high-pitched hiss, recoiling as the force of the strike sends it stumbling back. But it's not enough to stop it. The creature's sinewy form bends unnaturally, and it snarls, quickly recovering, its claws lashing out blindly in retaliation. You duck just in time, feeling the rush of air as the claws slice past your head. The creature hisses again, but it's slower now, staggering slightly from the blow you dealt. Its movements, once so calculated and fluid, are now very erratic, disrupted by pain and rage. This is your chance. You swing the mace again, even harder this time, aiming for the creature's exposed neck. The weapon connects with a sickening crack, the force of the blow driving the creature into the wall. It crumples, collapsing onto all fours, its long claws scrabbling at the stone in a desperate attempt to regain balance. It lets out another low, guttural growl, but you can see it weakening. Its head tilts, mouth gaping open in a silent scream, blood seeping from where the mace crushed its sinew. The torchlight flickers weakly, casting long shadows over the scene, and the creature's body spasms, but it doesn't stop. Even as it crumples, the creature begins to pull itself upright, its arms shaking and its claws flexing, still intent on tearing into you. But you can't let it regain its balance. Gritting your teeth, you raise the mace one final time and rush forward, driving the weapon down with every ounce of strength left in your body. The mace strikes the creature's head, shattering what little defense it had left. The sound of cracking bone fills the air, followed by the wet schlap of flesh as the creature collapses. Its body crumples onto the stone floor, a twisted heap of muscle and bone. Silence falls over the chamber, save for your labored breathing. You stand over the fallen creature, mace still raised, expecting it to rise again. But it doesn't. The creature lies motionless, a final shudder running through its body as its miserable life ebbs away. You stagger back, nearly dropping the mace as exhaustion washes over you. The Skinshedder's skin still clings to your body, and the stench is unbearable, but you don't care. You're alive, and that's what matters. The crypt is silent once more. You cast a final glance at the creature's crumpled form, and then turn toward the narrow passageway ahead. You rip the Skinshedders' discarded flesh from your shoulders, casting it aside with a grimace. Your arm burns from the wound, and the cold of the crypt begins to take its toll. But you don't stop. You've survived this far. You'll survive whatever comes next. Or at least you hope so, anyway. The Skinshedders have retreated into the walls, and their skittering claws silent now. But you know better than to think yourself safe. There could always be more threats lurking in these catacombs. Your arm burns from the gash the creature left, and your body is screaming for rest. The cold seeps into your bones and you're covered in blood. Still you push forward, deeper into the crypt. You turn a corner and find a small chamber, almost hidden from the main path. Unlike the rest of the crypt, this room feels different. The aura of the dead is less palpable here, and the faintest hint of warmth lingers in the air. Your eyes scan the room, and you spot a shrine set against the far wall. Dust and cobwebs cover the stone, but there's something almost peaceful about it. You step inside cautiously, lowering your weapon as you approach the shrine. It is simple, worn stone etched with symbols long faded by time. But at its base, something catches your eye. A small wooden chest buried in the dust. You crouch, appreciating its ornate design, and then you pry it open with a soft creak, and inside you find an old, tattered scroll. The parchment easily tears in your hands, and the aged ink is still somewhat legible in places. It reads as follows. In the age before Ash claimed the skies, and before HollowMarrow became, was a king, the Lord of Marrow, and he rules these crypts. Beyond the veil of life, a warden of followers, the HollowMarrow priests, patrol these. Dominion stretches no longer over lands, but over graves. The Bone Sovereign's throne is no longer made of gold, but of death and grime. You roll the scroll back up, tucking it into your pack, and take a moment to breathe. This safe room may offer a brief reprieve, but it also confirms your worst fears. The deeper you go, the more dangerous these crypts will become. You sit next to the chest, leaning back and resting against the altar, breathing deeply. Before you know it, you fall asleep. You awaken sometime later, feeling more rested than you ever have, or at least for as far back as you can remember, which isn't much more than a few hours. You've now moved on and left the shrine behind, the weathered scroll tucked safely into your pack. But the words echo in your mind. The Lord of Marrow, probably a necromantic king imprisoned in this place. The deeper you go, the more the crypt feels alive with a furious lurking malice. The scent of decay is stronger now, mixed with something colder and more unnatural. You reach a wide, circular chamber, the walls lined with bone carvings and traces of death. And you hear a slow, deliberate clattering of bones and steady chanting. From the far side of the chamber you see them, 3 Marrow priests, their face hidden beneath deep hoods, hands outstretched over an altar of bones. Their whispers fill the air with a low, guttural chant, and the ground beneath you begins to tremble. The bones scattered across the chamber floor begin to shift, rattling and scraping against the stone. Slowly they rise, then rushing and merging, forming something larger, something far more dangerous. The priest's chant grows louder, and you watch in horror as the bones fuse into a monstrous shape. It soon towers above you, a skeletal colossus of melded limbs and jagged bones. Its joints are unnaturally long, each limb bending in ways that defy normalcy, and its oversized skull grins down at you, a poor facade of emotion. Its claws scrape against the floor, leaving deep gouges in the stone. Its ribcage expands with a creaking groan as if it's drawing in breath, though it has no lungs. A Gravemauler. The name echoes in your mind. This is what the Marrow priests were guarding. This is the force they unleash on those who dare defile the crypts. The Marrow priests step back, their hands raised as they command the creature. It moves towards you with slow, deliberate strides. Each step a thunderous crash of bone against the stone. Then it lunges forward with a horrifying screech, its arms whistling through the air, a giant fist flying directly at your chest. You dive to the side, rolling across the hard floor just in time to avoid the impact. The force of the blow crashes into the wall behind you, sending chunks of stone scattering across the ground. The Gravemauler is undeterred, turning toward you as it slams one of its massive clawed hands down again. You narrowly dodge the strike, the jagged fingers now slashing through the air, just inches from your face. You rise to your feet, adrenaline surging through your veins as you grip your weapons tighter. There is no escape now. You have to fight. You circle the creature, trying to find an opening. The Gravemauler's long limbs give it an enormous reach, and it uses that to its advantage, swiping at you with wide, sweeping motions that force you to keep moving. Each time you think you found an opening, it readjusts, its movements unfairly quick for something its size. And then without warning, it rears back and releases a bone-chilling screech. The sound reverberates through the chamber, and the remaining bones scattered on the ground around you begin to rise, drawn towards the creature. They spin in the air, caught in a deadly vortex, a bone storm. The storm whips around the Gravemauler, sharp fragments of bone flying like shrapnel. You throw up an arm to protect your face, feeling the sharp sting as several fragments slice across your skin. There's no getting close now, not with the bone storm raging as it is. You duck behind one of the pillars, trying to catch your breath. The Gravemauler's claws rip through the air as it stalks closer, its eyeless gaze locked onto your hiding spot. You need a plan. This thing isn't going to go down easily, and the Marrow priests are still watching, waiting for you to fail. As you press yourself against the cold, damp stone, your mind races. You can't overpower it, but maybe you can outsmart it. Your heart races as you peer from behind the pillar. The Gravemauler stalks through the chamber, its bone storm whirling, the shards of bone shredding the air around it. Its hulking frame dominates the room, a relentless force of necromantic rage. Every time you try to land a blow, it simply absorbs more bones from the surrounding dead, growing stronger. You can't keep this up. Then your eyes flick to the Marrow priests, standing just behind the creature, their bony fingers waving in the air, dark magic pouring from their hollow mouths in rhythmic chants. They're the ones controlling the Gravemauler, feeding it power. Without them, it's probably vulnerable. A plan forms in your mind, reckless, but your only hope. You can't beat the Gravemauler head on. But if you can disrupt the priests, cut off the flow of necromantic magic, they'll likely lose control of the creature. You grip your mace tighter, heart pounding. You have to act fast. With a burst of adrenaline, you dash out from behind the pillar, sprinting toward the nearest priest. The Gravemauler screeches, sensing your movement, but you're too fast. Its claws slam into the ground just behind you, but you're already on the move, closing the distance between you and the Marrow priests. You leap toward the nearest priest, raising your mace high. The Marrow priest barely has time to react before you swing with all your might, the head of your weapon crashing into the top of its shoulder. Bones shatter under the impact, and the priest lets out a rasping gasp as the concentration breaks, and the chant falters. The Gravemauler, still mid-lunge, jerks violently, its connection to the priest's fraying. Its clawed hand, intended for you, now swings wide, straight into the priest you just attacked. With a visceral crunch, the massive claws impale the priest, lifting its frail body off the ground. The skeletal figure hangs limply for a moment before being flung aside like a rag doll, splattering against the nearby wall. One down. The remaining Marrow priests hiss in unison, their hands moving faster now, desperate to regain control over the Gravemauler. But the damage is done. The creature's movements become even more erratic, its hulking form stumbling as it claws at the air, no longer able to focus. Dark magic flickers across its bones, unstable and dangerous, and you press the advantage. You charge toward the second priest, your muscles burning with the effort, but the adrenaline keeps you moving. The priest raises its hand to cast a spell, but you're faster. You slam into it, knocking it to the ground, and your mace comes crashing down on top of it. You connect with the sternum, and its chest caves in. You hear a popping sound at the same time, and a torrent of blood sprays from its mouth across your face. The Gravemauler lets out a furious, bone-rattling screech, its eyeless skull snapping toward you as it senses the disruption. The ground trembles beneath its rage, and you barely have time to roll out of the way before its massive claw crashes down where you stood just moments before, shattering the stone floor in a shower of dust and debris. But without the priests to guide it, the Gravemauler's attacks are now wild and uncontrolled. It slashes wildly, sending chunks of stone and bone flying, its mindless rage turning it into a blunt force of destruction. You scramble to your feet, gasping for breath, but there's no time to stop. The Gravemauler is still coming, but now it's fighting blind, its enormous body crashing into the walls, smashing through pillars, threatening to send the crypt into a thunderous collapse. The remaining priest screams, their control slipping as they watch their creation fall into chaos. The last priest steps forward, hands glowing with necromantic power as he tries to reestablish control. His voice rises above the chaos, calling to the Gravemauler, but you can see the strain on his stricken face. Their bond is weakening, and you seize the moment. With the Gravemauler distracted, you rush the final priest. Swinging your torch in a wide, one-handed arc, the priest barely turns in time to see you, its eyes widening in horror. Your torch connects right between its eyes with an explosive force. A spray of shattered bone and brain matter paints the floor as the priest is flipped backwards from the force, burning violently to ashes before it hits the floor. The torch burns with holy light. The Gravemauler howls, a deep, bone-rattling sound that reverberates through the crypt. Without the priests, it stumbles, its massive form struggling to stay upright. Bones fall from its body, clattering to the ground in a cascade of necromantic failure. The Bone Mauler, its form barely holding together, turns toward you, its massive claws dragging along the ground. Its necromantic core, glowing faintly within its chest, flickers while unstable, but still powerful. It roars and charges toward you like a gorilla, desperation driving it forward. With a shout, you hurl your torch at the creature's chest, aiming for the exposed core. The flame strikes the core, and for a moment, time seems to slow. And then the flame spreads across the Gravemauler's bones, catching on the dark magic that holds it together. The creature screams, a deep, otherworldly howl that shakes the very walls of the crypt. The flame spreads rapidly, consuming the Gravemauler's body, and the air is filled with the acrid stench of burning bone. You dive back as the Gravemauler collapses in a heap of bones before you, the dark energy that held it together evaporating in a cloud of failure. The bones clatter to the ground, lifeless once more, and for a moment there is silence. You rise slowly, breathing hard, your body aching from the fight. The chamber is a wreck, bones and rubble scattered everywhere, the Marrow priests destroyed, and their magic unraveled. The Gravemauler lies in pieces, its grotesque form reduced to nothing but a pile of scorched remains. But as you catch your breath, something flickers, a faint, sickly glow emanating from the pile of bones near the collapsed beast. You hesitate, but the glow persists, pulsing faintly with holy fire and necromantic power. Despite your exhaustion, you're drawn to it. You step carefully through the scattered bones. The glow grows brighter as you approach, revealing something half buried beneath the debris. And you kneel, moving the cold bones away. And there you discover a weapon. It's a long, jagged blade, not forged from metal, but from the bones of the Gravemauler itself. The hilt is wrapped in sinew, dark and rough, and the blade, formed from a single, massive shard of the Gravemauler's ribs, is sharp and gleaming with otherworldly energy. The weapon feels strangely light in your hand, but there's a weight to its presence, something powerful and dangerous, as though the Gravemauler's rage still lingers within it. The Gravemauler's core, the same pulsing energy you shattered in battle, now seems to reside in the heart of this blade. Faint green light flickers within the bone, casting eerie shadows on the crypt walls. You turn your weapon over in your hands, feeling the raw power that hums beneath the surface. It's cold to the touch, and it beats faintly, like a slow, steady beat of a heart. The Gravemauler's heart, perhaps. The blade thrums with a quiet, insistent energy, a reminder of the beast it once belonged to. For a moment you consider leaving it behind. You can only guess what necromantic power can do, the way it can defile everything it touches. but you know better than to discard something like this. In this world, power seems to be survival, and this blade, that might be the edge you need against whatever awaits you deeper in the crypts. But there's something else. As you grip the hilt, you feel a faint pull in your chest, as though the weapon is hungry. The thrum of dark magic flows through it, and for a split second, you wonder if it might one day pull you in, like it pulled the bones together to form the Gravemauler. You shake the thought from your mind. There will be time to worry about that later. For now, you've earned this victory, and the weapon that comes with it. The crypt is silent now, save for the faint crackle of bones settling in the aftermath of the battle. Dust hangs in the air, swirling lazily in the dying torchlight as the remains of the Gravemauler lay scattered in pieces. The last of the Marrow priests are gone, reduced to fragments of brittle bone, their chants silenced forever. You rise slowly, wiping the sweat and blood from your brow. Every part of your body aches from the fight, but there's no time to rest. You know instinctively that the worst is yet to come. As you glance around the ruined chamber, your eyes catch something strange. A deep crack in the floor where the Gravemauler fell. At first you dismiss it as just another fracture from the battle, but then you notice the faint whisper of air rising from below, and it smells different. You approach cautiously, kicking aside the bones that litter the ground. The crack in the floor is widened, and as you crouch down, you see that it isn't just a crack. The ground has collapsed inward, revealing a narrow fissure that descends into the darkness below. You lean closer, peering into the chasm. The air that rises from the depths is heavy with the scent of rot, but it's even colder, much colder than the rest of the crypt. It chills your skin. With it comes the strange sense of foreboding, as though whatever lies below has been waiting for you. The Hollowmarrow Depths. The Marrow priests weren't just protecting this chamber. They were guarding something deeper, something far older than even their necromantic magic. You secure your weapon, the Bonecleaver, on your back, and after taking one last glance around the ruined chamber, you begin to climb down. The crack on the floor leads to a narrow shaft, barely wide enough for you to squeeze through. You climb carefully, your hands gripping the cold and rough stone as you make your way deeper into the earth. The deeper you go, the colder the air becomes. Every breath you take feels like ice in your lungs. The scent of rot only grows stronger. After what feels like an eternity, your feet finally touch flat ground. You stand in a narrow tunnel, barely wide enough to turn around. The walls here are slick with moisture and fungus. The faint sound of dripping water echoes from somewhere deep within. The air is thick with the stench of decay, and the stone beneath your feet feels strangely soft. You raise your torch, the flickering light casting long shadows along the tunnel walls. Ancient, crumbling bones litter the floor, sticking in pits of muck. Some are human, but others are much larger. They seem wrong, unnatural. You swallow hard. The air is becoming more and more difficult to breathe. You've been in the crypts long enough to know that the dead here are restless, but this is different. The Hollowmarrow Depths feel alive. The tunnel leads deeper into the crypts, winding through the narrow, twisting passageways that seem to defy logic. The stone walls feel closer, as though the earth itself is trying to crush you, and the further you go, the darker it becomes. Your torch flickers weakly, barely able to hold back the shadows that press in around you. After what feels like hours, the tunnel finally opens into a larger chamber. The air here is thick with moisture, and the ground is slick with something you can't quite identify. In the center of a room, there's a massive stone door, buried beneath a layer of grime and rot. Faint, flickering runes are carved into the surface of the door, and their meanings long forgotten, but their presence unmistakable. This is a barrier. You step closer, your hand brushing against some cold stones. The runes tremble faintly beneath your fingers, as though they're reacting to your presence. For a moment you hesitate. You can feel something on the other side of the door. Something that's old and powerful, but sealed away, buried beneath centuries of dust and decay. Whatever lies beyond this door was never meant to be disturbed. You reach for the Bonecleaver, gripping its sinewy hilt tightly. The weapon feels alive in your hand, its energy thrumming against your skin. The Gravemauler's essence still lingers within it. You take a deep breath, gathering your strength, and then with a firm shove, you push the door open. The door opens with a low, rumbling groan, revealing a massive chamber beyond. Your torch flickers again in the cold air, struggling to light the room, but even in the dim light, you can see the sheer scale of the place. The walls are lined with bones, not just skeletons of the dead, but massive creatures whose remains have fused into the very stone. The floor is slick with a dark, oily substance, and the ceiling is lost in shadow, too high to see. More ruins are carved into every surface, their faint glow barely visible beneath the grime that covers them. In the center of the room stands a massive altar, its surface slick with the offerings of some ritual. The air is thick with deterioration, but beneath it you catch the faint scent of something else. Blood. You step forward, your hand still gripping the Bonecleaver, and as you do, you feel the ground beneath your feet tremble slightly. The chamber seems to breathe, the walls pulsing with a slow and steady rhythm. You take another step, and your foot slips on the slick ground. You look down and see it, a trail of blood, leading from the altar to the far side of the room, where a set of dilapidated stone stairs descends into the darkness. Whatever ritual was performed here, it was recent, and whoever or whatever was involved, they've gone deeper. The stairs are narrow and treacherous, slippery with the same oily substance that coats the floor of the chamber above. You grip the walls for support as you descend, your torch lambent in the darkness. The further you go, the stronger the sense of dread becomes. Beneath the silence, you can hear a faint, steady quivering, like the beating of a heart. It reverberates through the stone. You finally reach the bottom of the stairs, and you find yourself standing at the entrance to a vast, open cavern. The ceiling is lost in shadow, and the walls are lined with massive knotted roots. In the center of the cavern is an old, magnificent tree, its heavy branches reaching out like skeletal hands. The pulse is louder now, emanating from somewhere beneath the tree. Whatever power resides here is old, possibly older than the crypts, certainly older than the dead who fill them. And you step closer, the Bonecleaver humming faintly in your hand. The Hollowmarrow Depths are not just a place of death, they were a prison where something better off forgotten slumbers. The silence in the Hollowmarrow Depths feels stifling, and as you take another step towards the incongruous tree in the center of the cavern, you feel a palpable alteration in the air. The pulse that you've been sensing beats louder now, a low rhythmic throb that seems to crawl beneath the surface. The tree looms before you, gnarled and ancient, its bark blackened as though it's been feeding off the decay of this place for centuries. Thick, sprawling roots curl out from beneath it, grazing through the stone floor. As you near, you can feel a strange energy radiating from those roots, a power that calls to the Bonecleaver in your hand. The weapon responds with a low hum, its faint necromantic energy mingling with whatever dark forces seep from this cursed earth. You hesitate, but only for a moment. Steeling yourself, you step closer, bringing the torch up higher to cast more light over the scene. The shadows dance along the cavern walls, shifting like the ghostly commemorations of those who perished here. Your gaze falls on the base of the tree where the roots grow thicker, organic in the way they have overtaken the floor. The earth is wet here, and soaked through with something more than water. Blood. It's pooled at the base of the roots, thick and black. The sight makes your stomach lurch, but you can't look away. There's something in the center of the pool, barely visible beneath the dark liquid. It catches the light from your torch, a faint gleam of reddened metal. Carefully you kneel, reaching toward the object. As your fingers brush against it, you feel a jolt of cold energy spike through your hand. You draw back instinctively, but the object remains lodged in the pool. With a grunt, you pull harder, and the item comes free. It's a small medallion, engraved with runes similar to those you saw in the upper crypts. Though these are older, the markings more crude. The design is rudimentary, yet purposeful, clearly of origin. The medallion hums faintly with power, not unlike the Bonecleaver, but more primal, more dangerous. You grip the medallion tightly in your fist, rising to your feet. Whatever this medallion is, it's tied to the power that emanates from the roots, the tree, and something far deeper. Then, a sound so faint it could almost be your imagination. Breathing. You lock your grip on the Bonecleaver, feeling its sharpness score your palm. You turn your gaze to the tree once more, and now you can see it. The bark is shifting, slowly, subtly, but undeniably. The gnarled surface of the tree seems to quake, waking. The pulse you've been feeling is no longer just a distant throb. It's louder now and stronger, and it's coming from below. You step back from the tree, keeping your eyes fixed on the roots. Something deep within the Hollowmarrow Depths is alive, and it's calling to you, pulling you deeper into the crypt. The medallion in your hand drones with a faint resonance, vibrating against your skin, guiding you toward whatever lies beneath the tree. You glance down at the pool of dark blood before turning your attention to the far end of the cavern. There, barely visible in the vague torchlight, is a small, narrow passageway covered by the roots that snake out from the tree. It leads downward. With a deep breath, you move forward, slipping past the roots and stepping into the passageway. The medallion grows heavier in your hand, and the energy more pronounced as you venture deeper. The path winds down steeply, the fungus-ridden walls dripping with moisture. The sensation of being watched grows stronger, and though you hear nothing, you can feel the presence of something below, waiting for you. Finally, the passage opens into another cavern, much smaller than the one above, but no less grand. The roots from the tree above have snaked down into this chamber as well, curling around the stone walls like veins. The pulsing is stronger here, effervescent. In the center of the chamber is another stone altar, not too dissimilar from the ones above. It is cracked and covered in strange markings, older than any you've encountered so far. The medallion quivers in your hand, and without thinking, you bring it to the altar. As you lay the medallion on the frigid stone, a rumbling sound fills the chamber. The ground beneath you shakes. The altar begins to sink into the floor, grinding stone against stone as it descends, revealing a hidden passageway beneath it. The rumbling grows louder, echoing through the walls as the passage yawns open, beckoning you deeper still. You step forward, descending into the final depths of the HollowMarrow Crypts. The Hollowmarrow Depths seem to be siphoning warmth from your very skin. The air is heavy, thick with the weight of centuries, and it feels more like you're pushing through water than walking through air. The damp stone beneath your feet is treacherous with age-old grime, and each step echoes faintly, swallowed by the endless dark. You follow the slender passage that the medallion revealed, your torch dancing feebly as the shadows seem to close in. The dim light barely holds back the blackness, but it's enough to guide your way. The Bonecleaver whines faintly in your hand, a constant presence. You can sense the power pulsing within it, reacting to the energy in this place, and the passage spirals downward until the walls open into a massive underground hall. The size of the chamber catches you off guard. Vaulted ceilings stretch high above, lost in the shadow, and at first you can make out only vague shapes in the gloom, but as your eyes adjust, the chamber begins to take form. Rows upon rows of cracked stone pillars line the hall. The floor is plagued with bones, scattered haphazardly across the stone, and the walls, like the floors, are covered in decay, not just the decay of flesh, but of history itself. But it is the far end of the chamber that commands your attention. There, shrouded in the darkness, you see a throne. The throne is massive, carved from pale bones fused together in a display of absolute power. The arms of the chair are formed from human-like skulls, and the backrest is made from the spines of giants, woven together to create an imposing seat of death. Upon the throne sits a figure, motionless, its massive form cloaked in shadow. You move closer to get a better look. The figure is a skeleton, towering and regal even in death. The Bone Sovereign. His body is draped in the scraps of a once magnificent armor, now rusted and corroded, though it still clings to his skeletal form with a grotesque majesty. A crown of bone rests atop his skull, a symbol of the kingdom he once ruled, long dead, like him. In his bony grip is a massive scythe, its blade curved and serrated, still sharp despite the passage of time. But it is his chest that now draws your eye. There, nestled within his rib cage, is a faintly glowing core, beating slowly with a sickly green light. The king's core. It radiates power, and the closer you get, the more the Bonecleaver vibrates in response, its dark magic resonating with the energy in the air. You stop a few paces from the throne, your torch held high, casting flickering light over the Bone Sovereign's form. His skull remains bowed, the eye sockets dark and hollow. He's been here for centuries, sealed in this tomb of bones, waiting for something or someone to wake him. The medallion in your hand vibrates with a faint energy, and the Bonecleaver grows colder, as if it too senses what's coming. You glance down at the medallion, turning it over in your hand. The runes etched into the surface glow in response to the energy of the king's core. You know instinctively that it's the key. This medallion holds the power to awaken the Bone Sovereign, but the moment you do, there will be no turning back. The medallion flares to life, the runes glowing a sickly green as they resonate with the energy of the king's core. The torchlight flickers wildly as the chamber itself seems to react. The bones on the floor tremble, rattling against the stones as though something deep beneath the crypt stirs. You step closer, raising the reddened medallion towards the king's core. The moment it comes within range, the core responds. A sudden jolt of energy shoots through the chamber, and the Bonecleaver in your hand grows ice cold, thrumming violently as the king's energy fills the room. The air shifts and you freeze. The Bone Sovereign moves. It is a small movement at first, a faint clenching of his skeletal hand around the scythe. But it is enough. Slowly, the king's skull lifts from where it hung, his crown of bone catching the dim light of your torch. The green glow of the core throbs within his chest, brighter now, casting eerie shadows across his rib cage and the throne beneath him. His skull tilts ever so slightly, and though his face is nothing but bone, you can feel the cold, dead gaze settle on you. The Bone Sovereign's skeletal body shifts, his form creaking as though the weight of centuries presses against him. His scythe scrapes against the floor with a dull, menacing sound, and the green glow of the king's core pulses rhythmically from within his ribcage. His skull tilts further, the hollow socket still fixed on you. The silence that fills the room is oppressive, but then a sound like a deep breath fills the chamber. A voice, a cold, distant voice, emanates from the very air around you, though the Bone Sovereign's skeletal jaw does not move. It is as though his presence itself speaks.
Foolish mortal.
The words echo through the chamber.
Come to awaken what the gods fear.
The air grows colder as he rises to his full height, towering above you. His bones, though aged and cracked, seem to shudder with the necromantic energy, restoring his long-dead body.
Do you not know what you've disturbed? I was a king before your ancestors crawled from the muck. I was ruler of kingdoms, no, of empires before the gods cast me down.
He takes a step forward, the bones scattered around the floor rattling with each movement.
In their cruelty they stole my flesh, but they could not steal my crown, my legacy.
The scythe rises slowly, its curved blade catching the flickering light of your torch.
Still, they left me here, sealed in a kingdom of bone and rot. But now,
The green light from the core in his chest flares, casting the chamber in a sickly glow as he raises the scythe fully.
You have freed me.
The Bone Sovereign's voice fades. His scythe gleams in the radiance of the king's core, its serrated edge humming with necromantic power. The skeletal warriors at his feet begin to stir, rising from their fitful slumber, their bones clattering together as they gather into formation around him.
Come.
The Bone Sovereign intones, his hollow voice dripping with malice.
I will show you why I was feared.
The earth shudders violently, sending cracks racing across the chamber floor as bones, long buried in the dust of ages, begin to stir. From every corner, skeletal warriors claw their way from the shattered remains, their limbs jerking to life with unnatural force. Their empty eye sockets lock onto you, unfeeling, driven by the same dark power that animated the Bone Sovereign. The sound of rattling bones fills the air, a macabre chorus of dead rising once more to serve their master. They move in waves, their brittle bodies shambling forward, arms outstretched, weapons in hand, as they close in with relentless determination. You waste no time. With a firm grip on the Bonecleaver, you swing through the first wave, the blade cutting through yellowed bone with ease. Their brittle frames shatter on impact, collapsing into dust and fragments. But even as they fall, more rise from the shadows, their broken forms reforming at the will of the necromantic forces that bind them. For each one you strike down, another rises in its place, an unbroken tide of dead marching toward you. Your breath is quick and your muscles begin to burn with the exertion, but still you press on, hacking through their ranks with deadly precision. The floor becomes a sea of broken skeletons, their bones piling up with each swing of your weapon. Yet the horde seems endless. From the darkness even more emerge, shadows moving at the edge of your vision, spectral figures drifting toward you, their forms barely held together by crumbling sinew and raw energy that fuels them. Every strike feels like a fleeting victory. Each enemy cut down replaced by another, and though their bones are weak, their numbers overwhelm. The room grows tighter as they swarm from all directions, surrounding you in a deadly maelstrom of bone and decay. The Bone Sovereign watches, unmoving, as though testing you. His skeletal hand grips the scythe tighter, the green glow of the core within his chest pulsing brighter with every swing.
You fight well for a wretch,
he says, voice echoing through the chamber.
But it's not enough. You will never be enough.
He raises his free hand, and with a wordless command, the bones scattered on the floor begin to rattle and rise. More skeletal warriors take shape, their broken forms assembling from the remains of past bloody battles. Their weapons are rusted and worn, but they move with the same relentless drive, pawns in the Bone Sovereign's eternal army. You change plans and rush toward the Bone Sovereign, ducking under the wide arc of his scythe. You swing at the Bone Sovereign's legs, aiming to weaken his stance, but the blade clatters off his bone-plated greaves. He barely flinches. With a grunt, you leap back, avoiding another deadly sweep of his scythe. The ground beneath your feet shifts as more bones rise, forming barriers of jagged bone spikes that block your path, forcing you into tighter spaces. The Bone Sovereign moves slowly, methodically, his undead warriors pressing you closer to him.
I have ruled for centuries.
The Bone Sovereign continues, his voice low and resonant, cutting through the din of battle.
I was the Lord of life and death. My kingdom was endless as far as the eye could see.
His scythe slams into the ground, sending a shockwave of energy rippling through the chamber. The skeletal warriors around you falter, their forms disintegrating as the energy races through them, only to be replaced by larger, more formidable undead, their forms torqued and bent by the dark magic that fuels them.
Under my reign, the dead walked with the living. The gods feared me, those cowards.
He swings his scythe again, the blade cutting through the air with a deadly, unnatural speed. You throw yourself to the side, barely dodging the strike, the stone floor shattering beneath the force of his blow. The Bone Sovereign turns toward you, the green light of his core flaring brighter.
They stole everything from me.
The Bone Sovereign's form begins to shift as the king's core in his chest pulses violently. The skeletal warriors around him again crumble into dust as he draws their energy into himself. His form grows larger, his bones expanding as the dark magic courses through him. His scythe, once slow, now moves with terrifying speed. He steps toward you, his movements no longer sluggish but filled with renewed power.
I will claim what is mine.
His voice rings with a cold fury.
This world belongs to the dead. I shall rule it once more.
You plunge toward him, aiming for the king's core in his chest. But he swings the scythe with unnatural speed, forcing you back. The air crackles with necromantic energy as he raises his free hand, summoning bone spikes from the ground, trapping you in a cage of jagged bone. You slash at the spikes, breaking through, but the Bone Sovereign is upon you before you can free yourself completely. His scythe slashes through the air and you barely manage to block it with the Bonecleaver, the force of the blow sending you flailing back.
The gods will not save you.
He hisses, his voice growing darker.
They have abandoned me, they will abandon you too.
With another wave of his hand, the floor beneath you shakes violently, and skeletal arms burst from the ground, clawing at your legs, trying to pull you under. You hack at them desperately, cutting yourself free as the Bone Sovereign looms closer. With a roar, you charge, driving the Bonecleaver into the Bone Sovereign's side. The blade bites deep, cracking through his rib cage, and a shower of brittle bone fragments scatter across the floor. The king's core in his chest pulses violently, sending fissures through his skeletal form as a hiss of ancient, dead air escapes from within him. The Bone Sovereign reels from the blow, but he swings his arms in retaliation, knocking you back. You regain your balance just in time to see the Sovereign's shoulders sag, the bone there splintered further. He's weakening. You press the advantage, slashing down again, this time aiming for his exposed leg. The Bonecleaver shatters his femur with a sickening crunch, and he staggers, unable to support his full weight. His free hand grasps for the scythe, but you don't give him the chance. With a final desperate swing, you bring the cleaver down upon his arm, shearing it off at the elbow. His hand falls to the ground, still clutching the scythe, and he lets out a sound, half snarl, half wail, that echoes through the crypt. As the battle reaches its peak, the Bone Sovereign's form begins to crack, his bones splintering under the strain of the necromantic energy surging through him. The light from the core in his chest flares wildly and unstable, as if centuries of death and decay are finally catching up with him. He stumbles, his scythe clattering to the ground as he grasps at the king's core, trying to hold himself together.
No! I will not be undone!
He growls, his voice tinged with desperation.
I was a king. Am a king. Forever. I will take what is mine.
He takes a step toward you, his skeletal form crumbling but still driven by the extinguishing flames of his power.
You cannot stop me. I am king. Eternal.
With one final strike, you aim for the core. Your weapon connects with a thunderous crack, sending a shockwave through the Bone Sovereign's chest. The core pulses violently once more, and then shatters, a burst of green light erupting from his chest, scattering the shattered remains of his bones across the chamber. The Bone Sovereign lets out a final, anguished cry, his voice echoing through the chamber like the wail of a dying storm. The Bone Sovereign crumbles to the ground, his form reduced to little more than dust and fragments of his once mighty frame, the air thick with the stench of rot and ancient magic as his broken body finally stills. And with that, the king's core is shattered. The Bone Sovereign's remains fall silent, his tortured reign finally ended. Your chest heaves with exhaustion as you survey the wreckage, and though you are barely able to stand, something compels you forward, something deeper than curiosity. Your eyes drift to the Bone Sovereign's crown, still resting atop the shattered remains of his skull, a twisted diadem of bone and ancient power, the symbol of a kingdom long lost to the annals of time. You approach the throne of bones, each step echoing through the vast chamber, your boots crunching over the remains of skeletal warriors that once rose to defend their master. The air feels thick, as though the room itself holds its breath, waiting for what comes next. The Bonecleaver still hums faintly at your side, but its cold energy seems distant, almost insignificant now that the Sovereign has fallen. Intricate runes are carved into the crown's surface, worn smooth by time but still faintly visible. As you draw closer, you feel a strange pull, as though the crown itself is calling you, urging you to take it. You hesitate, but only for a moment. The battle is over. The Bone Sovereign is defeated. Whatever power remains in the crown is yours to claim. You reach out and lift the crown from the Bone Sovereign's skull. For a moment, it feels light in your hand, almost fragile. But then, without warning, the crown shatters in your grip, splintering into shards of bone that scatter through the air like jagged knives. You stumble back as the pieces of the crown writhe and reform. They gather in the air for a brief second and then hurtle toward you. You raise your arm to shield yourself, but the shattered crown moves too quickly. With a sharp snap, the fragments close around your wrist, forming into a bracelet of bone. Shards bury themselves deep in your arm, some turning red while others remain white. The crown has not broken, it has bound itself to you. The bones tighten around your wrist, unyielding, and as they settle, you feel an intense burning sensation shoot up your arm. The pain is sharp, searing, and for a moment you grit your teeth, your vision blurring with the intensity of it. But then something else happens. Something far stranger. The pain begins to subside, replaced by a deep, throbbing pressure. Your vision blurs again, but this time, the world around you begins to shift. The chamber fades from view, and in its place you see images, memories flashing before your eyes, quick and fragmented, but vivid enough to feel real. You see a man, the Bone Sovereign, but not as you knew him. This is a man of flesh and blood, not bone and rot. He stands tall and regal, his features sharp and commanding, his body draped in royal robes and gleaming armor. He wears the crown of bone upon his head, the same crown that now binds itself to you. Your eyes are drawn to his arms, his wrists, and there, carved into his flesh, are the same runes that are etched into your own skin. The same symbols of power and control that mark you as cursed. You feel a strange kinship with this figure, even as the images shift again. The Bone Sovereign, King Maros, stands before a vast, shadowy altar, the same core that once pulsed in his chest glowing ominously in the center. He raises his arms, chanting in a language you cannot understand, his voice filled with determination and arrogance. Around him, figures of light, vague, indistinct shapes that radiate divine power, watch in silence. You see the moment of his betrayal, the moment the gods curse him. His flesh withers, his bones crack, and the once mighty king falls to his knees, his body decaying as the gods bind him to the crypt for eternity. But through it all, the ruins remained on his flesh, glowing faintly, tying him to the same magic that binds you. With a gasp, the vision ends. The crypt snaps back into focus, the air cold and still once more. The bracelet of bone remains around your wrist, but it no longer burns. Instead, it feels almost familiar, as though it was always meant to be there. You stare at it for a long moment, your mind racing with the images you've just seen. The Bone Sovereign, once a man of flesh like you, bore the same runes that now mark your skin. His curse, like yours, was tied to the gods. to their cruelty and indifference? Was this fate a warning of what is ahead of you? Or is it part of something greater, a cycle that you are only now beginning to understand? As you stand there, the bracelet cooling against your wrist, you feel something stir deep within your chest. A faint, almost imperceptible pull. It's not unlike the pull you felt before the Bone Sovereign's awakening, but this is different. It's darker and more distant, like the echo of a voice calling from far away. The blackened cradle. The name rises in your mind, unbidden, a whisper from the depths of your subconscious. You don't know how you know it, but you do. The blackened cradle is your next destination. The Bone Sovereign's fall was just the beginning. Whatever dark forces have set you on this path are still watching, still waiting for you to take the next step. You glance once more at the bracelet of bone on your wrist, the runes etched into it now glowing faintly, echoing the ones on your own skin. The connection between you and the Bone Sovereign has been made, but it is only part of the puzzle. There are more truths to uncover, more forces at play, and somewhere, in the shadow of the blackened cradle, the next piece of the puzzle awaits. With a final breath, you turn from the Bone Sovereign's ruined throne and begin your journey once more, into the dark, toward the blackened cradle. You step through the narrow passage that leads from the crypts, the cold, damp air from the Hollowmarrow Depths slowly replaced by a dry, suffocating heat. The light dims to a pale, sickly hue, casting long shadows across the landscape as you emerge in the Ashen Gateway, the entrance to the blackened cradle. Before you stretches a vast, crumbling plain of blackened stone, the land scarred by vicious, forgotten fire. Massive pillars of ashen rock lay crumbled against the desolate earth. Their surfaces are cracked and pitted, scorched by a heat that once burned with divine fury. Now they stand broken and defeated, like the pathetic remains of a civilization that once sought the gods' favor and was destroyed for its ambition. The sheer scale of this place is staggering. The Ashen Gateway stretches endlessly in all directions, a sprawling, decayed expanse that leads towards the distant fortress, the blackened cradle. It looms at the edge of your vision. The fortress gates are cracked and twisted, but still hold the vestiges of immense power. It feels as if you are standing at the threshold of some... The fortress gates are cracked and twisted, but still hold the vestiges of immense power. It feels as though you are standing at the threshold of something far greater and far darker than the crypts. Whatever lies within those walls has not been destroyed by time. It's been preserved. And the smell here is impossible to ignore. The air is thick with the stench of burnt flesh and sulfur, mingled with the acrid tang of ash and decay. It fills your lungs with every breath, searing your throat with its dryness. Every gust of wind kicks up a cloud of black ash, swirling around your feet and coating your skin in a thin layer. Beneath the ash lies the faint scent of something else, something darker. A smell that lingers, as though the earth itself still smolders from the fires that once ravaged this place. The ash swirls in choking clouds around you as you push forward. The blackened landscape stretches endlessly before you. Each step sends a faint crunch through the air, as though the earth itself has become brittle and hollow. The wind picks up again, carrying with it more ash and the distant sound of something moving far beyond the horizon. A low and unsettling rustle. The pillars of scorched stone tower above you. Some lean precariously, crumbling as you pass them, and their sheer size makes you feel like an insect crawling through the ruins of something titanic. Ahead is a set of massive, ruined gates. These once guarded the blackened cradle, though now they hang open, broken. From here, they look like the maw of a colossal beast. The air is thick with the scent of burnt flesh, but beneath that lies something more insidious, something sharp and electric, humming like a storm brewing beneath the surface. The heat is intense, but what grips you is not the heat. It's the growing sense of pressure, a tightness coiling along your spine. The very air is tightening its grip on your nerves. You step closer to one of the massive pillars, and that's when you feel it. A faint buzz, like the static shock of electricity through your veins. The sensation crawls along your skin, and before you can react, you hear a sharp electric crack. From the shadow of the towering structure, something moves. At first, you only see a shape, thin and malformed. It steps forward with a measured grace, and as it emerges from the gloom, the full horror of it becomes clear. The creature's skin is dried and tight, and blackened like the fortress and its gates, its ribs jutting out like warped branches. Spindly arms hang at its sides, but it's the tendrils, the mass of dark writhing tendons that sprout from its back that draw your eye. They twitch and curl like independent living things, reaching out in the air, feeling their way toward you. Its face, if it can be called that, is a skinless visage of exposed nerve. Its eyes glowing faintly with a pale, pulsing light. It doesn't need to see you. It feels you. The buzz in the air grows louder, and you realize that it's not just a sound. It's the creature tracking you like a shark, sensing every twitch of muscle, every trace of movement. The creature, a NerveFlayer, lets out a low, distorted squeal, and your muscles seize involuntarily. For a brief, terrifying moment, your limbs feel like they're no longer your own. Your hands clench and your legs stiffen, your back cramps. For the briefest moment, you cannot move. It takes a step closer, and you feel a sharp sting at the base of your skull, like needles digging into your nerves. The tendrils are moving now, extending outward, seeking your skin. Your body thaws and you raise the Bonecleaver instinctively, but the creature moves quickly, lashing out with one of its tendrils. The long, needle-like appendage whips towards you, aiming for your arm, and you barely parry the attack in time. The Bonecleaver sizzles as the tendril hits it, leaving a faint scorch mark. You stumble back, but the NerveFlayer doesn't relent. It vanishes in the ashen air, moving so quickly that it seems to disappear for a second, reappearing closer, its face now just feet from yours. The buzz in the air turns into a static roar, and the creature lets out another screech. This time, the sound cuts through your body like a blade of pure agony. You fall to your knees, your muscles locked in place as the tendrils reach for you again, wrapping around your wrist, and the pain spikes, sending fire through your nerves. Your vision blurs, the world narrowing to just the searing pain pulsing through your arm. You grit your teeth and swing the Bonecleaver, the blade slicing through the air and catching the tendril just before it can sink deeper into your skin. The sharp edges sever the tendril, and the NerveFlayer lets out a high-pitched wail, its remaining tendrils recoiling as it retreats. You stumble to your feet, but the creature is already recovering, the severed tendrils still twitching violently on the ground. Its eyes lock on to you again, the glow brightening as the creature stands straight, taller now, and more menacing. The creature's remaining tendrils stretch outward, crackling with the same dark energy, the same intent to burrow into your nerves, to take control of your body once more. But now you're ready. This time, you will cut deeper. The NerveFlayer stalks ahead, each step punctuated by the crackling buzz of its nerve-tuned tendrils. The severed appendage on the ground still wriggles like a dying insect, but the creature doesn't seem to mourn the loss of it. It merely adjusts, its focus entirely on you. The pulsing light in its eyes brightens, and the sensation of crawling electricity skitters up your spine. You take a slow breath, trying to shake off the lingering pain in your limbs. You steady yourself, feet planted on the cracked ground. The Bonecleaver thrums faintly in your grip, its cold weight a reassuring gift. The NerveFlayer's tendrils curl and writhe as it moves forward, its movements no longer fluid, but sharp and erratic, almost as if testing your reactions. You can feel the creature's influence on the very air, the power crackling around you like a distant storm, and with each step it takes, the sensations of pins and needles intensifies. Without warning, it lunges, its tendrils whipping forward with a terrifying speed. The air hisses as they cut through it, the needle-like tips aim directly at your chest. You sidestep it just in time, feeling the sharp sting of a tendril graze your arm as you swing the Bonecleaver in a wide arc. The blade catches two of the tendrils, slicing them clean off with a sickening crack, and the NerveFlayer shrieks, a high-pitched wail that reverberates in your skull. But the creature doesn't retreat. Instead, while its body contorts, and in a burst of unnatural speed, it's behind you before you can react. The tendrils wrap around your neck and arm, seizing your body with an iron grip. The moment they touch your skin, a wave of searing agony surges through you. Your muscles lock, every nerve in your body alight with unbearable pain. Each nerve ending manipulated by the creature. You can feel the tendrils burrowing deeper, seeking control, trying to turn your body against you. For a moment, your vision is gone. The world is nothing but the pulsing agony coursing through your veins. Your hand twitches uncontrollably, and you feel the Bonecleaver slip from your grip. It hits the ground with a dull thud, just out of reach, and the NerveFlayer's grip tightens, pulling you closer as its grotesque face looms over you, its glowing eyes burning into your soul. But somewhere, deep in the recesses of your mind, something stirs. Rage, defiance, the knowledge that you've faced death too many times to fall to this creature. You grit your teeth and push back, fighting against the tide of pain that floods through your body. With a desperate cry, you manage to wrench your arm free, your fingers stretching outward to the thing's throat. Every muscle screams in protest, but you force yourself to move, ignoring the waves of pain that course through you. Just as the NerveFlayer leans in, its tendrils tightening for a final strike, your fingers close around its throat. It feels like you're holding lightning. Your fingers twitch and spasm, but still you squeeze. The tendrils dig in deeper with a new sense of urgency, and you feel them slither and writhe under your skin. You slam your eyes shut and cry out again in animalistic pain. It's absolutely maddening. You manage to raise your other hand to its throat. It hasn't even tried to move away from you. You clamp down with all the force you can muster. It lets out a surprised yelp like it just realized what was happening. The tendrils retreated from your skin as it begins to flail, trying to release your grip. But to its own folly, this gave you control of your hands again. You open your eyes and look at the creature, eye to eye. You both scream defiantly at each other, but you've won. You feel its throat begin to give under the pressure of your grip, and it can't scream anymore. It thrashes wildly, the tendrils lashing at your skin in explosions of disproportionate pain. Tighter. With something akin to a death grip, you wrench down one last time. You feel the throat suddenly collapse and the vertebrae in the spine separate. The NerveFlayer goes limp in your hand. At the same time it dies, every single nerve in your entire body flares at a level of pain that cannot be described, and you black out. The world is dark, a void of numb silence. For a moment, there is nothing. No memory, no sensation, just the lingering echo of unbearable pain that had consumed you before your mind retreated into the depths of unconsciousness. Then slowly awareness begins to return. It brings with it an ache so deep that it feels as though your very nerves are burning from within, still raw from the encounter with the NerveFlayer. You wake with a sharp gasp, your body jolting back to life as you suck in a lungful of air. The pain is still there, but now it's dull, a smoldering afterthought compared to what you had felt before. Your fingers still twitch involuntarily, curling against something in your palm. You open your eyes slowly, the light around you muted, strange shadows dancing across your vision. You're no longer in the Ashen Gateway. You lie in a grove, though to call it a grove feels wrong. What surrounds you are not trees, but blackened remnants of them, charred stumps and skeletal branches stretching upward, clawing at the sky, layered with a thick coating of ash and the burnt remains of what was once a thriving forest. The air here is dense, and the smell of charred wood is heavy in your lungs, though it carries a faint, sickly sweetness, as if something unnatural lingers just beyond your reach. Your muscles are stiff as you force yourself to sit up, each movement sending tremors of residual pain through your body. You can feel the effects of the NerveFlayer still clinging to you, your body weak and shaky, your skin tingling as though the creature's tendrils are still buried beneath the surface. But you're alive. Somehow, you survived. You unsteadily rise to your feet, pushing through the pain, forcing yourself upright. You glance down at your hand and find it still clenched around the severed tendril of a NerveFlayer, the slick, nerve-like cord twitching faintly as if some residual energy remains trapped inside. For a moment, you consider discarding it, the thought of keeping something so vile instinctively revolting. But then an idea takes root. Power. Even in death, the NerveFlayer's tendril holds something potent, something that might be turned to your advantage. You kneel beside the Bonecleaver as the severed tendril twitches in your grip. You pin it against the blade, your fingers moving with a steady intent as you bind it. It wraps easily, as though eager to be woven into the weapon's blade. Each loop tightens as if the tendril is alive, clinging to the Bonecleaver like thread stitched to a wound. The tendril squirms once, and then goes still, the dull glow fading into the dark bone of the weapon. The handle feels different now, warmer and almost alive. You flex your fingers around the hilt, feeling a faint tingle of the tendril beneath your palm. Though the NerveFlayer is gone, a part of its power remains, now fused with your blade. Whatever comes next, the Bonecleaver is ready. The Seared Grove stretches out ahead of you, filled with more blackened trees and cracked earth, but there's a faint glow far ahead, just beyond the nearest rise. A dim orange light, the embers of a dying fire. An instinct deeper than survival makes you march onward. Perhaps it's the curse, and the same force that's driven you through the brink of death and back again. Or perhaps it's something even more that calls to you from this place. You take a step, and then another, ash crunching with each movement. The light ahead glimmers faintly, barely illuminating the remains of what once grew here. Charred roots sprawl against the ground like dead snakes, and the air itself feels haunted, as though the forest still remembers what happened. You move deeper into the Seared Grove, and the glow ahead begins to intensify. The ground grows warmer beneath your feet, and you feel the faintest rattle from the earth. There is a sense of anticipation in the air, like the grove itself is waiting for you to reach the heart of it. A faint whisper. It steadily grows louder as you approach the glowing light. It's a sound that seems to come not from the grove itself, but from somewhere deep under it, deep in the earth. Does the fire still burn there? You pause at the edge of a clearing, and there at the center of the grove, you see a massive blackened tree, larger than any of the others. Its trunk is hollowed out, its bark cracked and glowing faintly with veins of magma like embers. The ground around it throbs faintly with heat. At its base lies something, an altar of sorts, formed from the charred stone and knotted roots, eroded and vilified with time. Against the altar rests an object, barely visible through the haze of heat that rises from the earth. Whatever it is, it calls to you. The heat around the altar distorts the air, making the object resting atop it seem to shimmer, almost as if it's alive. The faint radiance of embers from the surrounding charred roots continue to pulse softly. As you step forward, you see the object on the altar is no mere relic. You see it more clearly. A hunched figure, seated in a meditative posture, its form wrapped in ashen cloak. What you thought was an artifact is a man, or what was once a man. His body is deathly still, a dehydrated and withered husk. He seems to have become a part of the altar itself, as if the stone and flesh have fused together over centuries. A monk. As you approach, you notice something unnatural about the way he sits. His hands, clasped in prayer, are nothing but charred bones. His head is bowed, and the remains of his ashen hood pulled low over his face, but there's no doubt in your mind. This is no corpse. He waits. Suddenly, the heat around the altar flares. A rasping sound escapes the monk's body, low and broken like the last hum of a long-forgotten chant. You pause, instinctively readying the Bonecleaver. His presence presses against your skin, the sheer force of his being making the air around you ripple. And with a slow, unhurried movement, the monk raises his head, his face still concealed in shadow. "Who dares?" His voice is dry, crackling like burning wood.
to disturb the secrets of Ash.
His hands unfold from their meditative clasp, the brittle bones clicking together as they fall to his side. The air shifts, no longer heavy, but menacing. The heat itself is waiting to strike. The monk's robed form trembles and begins to move with an unnatural energy, the last spark of a flame reignited.
You come for knowledge, power, or are you here to burn like all the rest?
His face, still hidden beneath the hood, shifts upward. The faint light of embers catches the hollow beneath his cowl, revealing only the vaguest hint of scorched bone and ashen flesh. An unseen force makes the ground beneath your feet vibrate. The monk slowly rises from the altar. Centuries of sitting in silence have left his body brittle, yet he is fueled by something beyond you. His hands hover at his sides, and as he stands his full height, you see them ignite, growing into a vibrant flame. His very flesh seems to smolder as the fire that once consumed the grove is now coursing through him, crackling up from the ground, drawn to his form.
I fled the flames of gods,
he growls, heavy with bitterness.
But I cannot run from the inferno that they have bound to me.
The air warps, the embers at his feet swirling in a slow spiral as the flames around his body intensify. He doesn't seem to acknowledge the fire. It has become a part of him, intertwined with his existence. The Craven Monk, burned but not consumed, stands before you. Once a man, but now something far worse.
You've come to claim something that isn't yours, haven't you?
He rasps with resentment.
Then first, you will face what I did not.
The flames leap higher, and with a sudden movement, the Craven Monk surges, the fire at his hands taking shape into searing whips of molten heat. His body, though fragile, moves with ease as the flames themselves carry him forward. You barely manage to raise the Bonecleaver in time to block the first strike. The force sends you sliding back, the heat singeing your skin as the molten whip cracks inches from your face. The Seared Grove flares to life around you as the battle begins. The trees, once dormant, now breathe with the fire that courses through the monk.
You will burn like all those before you.
The Craven Monk sneers, his movements now unpredictable as the flames continue to lash out, trying to consume you as they once consumed him. The Craven Monk lunges again, his flaming whips whistling through the air, leaving trails of molten heat that burn the very ground as they arc toward you. You dodge to the side, narrowly avoiding the strike, but the searing heat still brushes your skin, leaving a painful scorch. His attacks are relentless and fluid, and though his body seems frail, the fire that surges through him grants him unnatural speed and strength. His burning hands crackle with the energy of a living furnace.
You should have fled, like I did.
The monk spits, the embers around his feet flaring with every step. You swing the Bonecleaver, meeting one of his flaming whips head-on. The impact sends a shock through your arms, but you hold firm. Sparks fly as the monk's flames collide with your weapon, the two forces battling for dominance. His eyes, or what remain of them, peer from beneath his hood, filled with a bitter resentment and the knowledge of 1,000 missed deaths. With another wild lash of his fiery whip, the monk forces you back. You parry the next strike, but the heat still scorches the air around you, making it harder to breathe. The Seared Grove is alive with flame and blackened tree. The fire that destroyed them is rekindling within their hollowed trunks. The Craven Monk snarls and presses the attack. He sweeps the ground with both fiery whips, forcing you to leap back as the earth crackles and sizzles beneath the onslaught. The flames seem to grow with every passing moment, feeding on his anger and bitterness, but there's something in his movements, a slight tremor, a hesitation. The fire fuels him, yes, but it's also consuming him, drawing on whatever is left of his broken soul.
"You can't run from it,"
he growls, his voice now a dry rasp.
"The fire takes everything."
His next attack is wild, and you catch the opening. As his whip sweeps past, you step forward and swing the Bonecleaver hard. The blade finds purchase, cutting deep into his side, and the monk staggers, a gasp of pain escaping his lips. His hand falters, the flame sputtering for only a moment before reigniting with fury. But it's too late. The wound has broken his momentum. You follow through with another strike, this time aimed for the center of his chest. The Bonecleaver sinks deep, and the Craven Monk cries out, a sound of both rage and sorrow. His flaming whips lash out in all directions, but they are weaker now, unreliable. The fire in him is dying. With one final desperate cry, he collapses to his knees, the flames around him flickering and shrinking until they're nothing more than faint embers. His body slumps forward. For a moment there is only silence. The fire that consumed his body fades, and as it does, the once charred remains of his flesh begin to regenerate. His skeletal hands regain their skin, his corrupted, blackened body softens, and his face, hidden for so long beneath the cowl, becomes human once again. He raises his head slowly, removing his cowl, his breathing shallow but steady. The bitter, vengeful snarl is gone, replaced with something almost peaceful. You freed me, he whispers, his voice now weak, barely audible. I thought I could escape it, that by running I would survive the god's fury. But it was only delay, only fear. His eyes meet yours, no longer glowing with the fiery rage, but with acceptance and something close to gratitude. He places a hand over the wound on his chest, the blood seeping slowly through his fingers. I have lived in shame for so long, a Craven Monk, cursed by the gods I once worshipped. I was not permitted death, but now I feel it. My time has finally come. The Craven Monk reaches behind the folds of his robe, pulling out a worn mantle, once a part of his ceremonial garb, but now blackened and frayed. With trembling hands, he offers it to you. Take this, stranger, my final gift, proof of what I once was, before the fire and before the fear. You reach out, taking the mantle from him, feeling the faint heat that still lingers within the fabric. It feels heavy, laden with the weight of a life lived in regret, but also with the promise of new strength, a new path forged through the flames. Just as you begin to speak, the earth trembles beneath your feet. The air around you grows cold, and the monk's eyes widen in sudden, sharp terror. He tries to speak, but before the words leave his mouth, blood-red chains explode from the blackened altar tree behind him, tearing through the air with a violent snap. No! The monk cries out, his voice strangled with agony as the chains wrap around his body. Hooks dig into his flesh, pulling with brutal force. The peaceful expression vanishes, replaced by one of pure pain. His hands grasp at the chains, but they are unrelenting. The monk's body contorts as the chains tear into him, wrenching him toward the altar, ripping pieces of his flesh away as they drag him closer. His scream is one of pure suffering, unlike anything you've ever heard. Blood pours from the wounds as pieces of his body are pulled apart, his limbs torn asunder by the force of the chains. His face is cycling through shock, confusion, and betrayal. He never saw this coming. His hands scrabbling uselessly on the ground as he's pulled inch by inch toward the blackened tree. His once human form is being devoured by the very thing he had sought refuge under for so many years. And with one final, violent yank, the chains pull him deep into the base of the tree, his body fusing with the tarnished roots and starving bark. What remains of him burns away in a sudden burst of white fire, consuming the last remnants of his flesh in a blinding flash. The grove falls silent once more, save for the faint crackle of embers. The Craven Monk is no more. A door swings open from within the altar tree, breaking away from the bloodied and gnarled bark. Absolute darkness lies within, and you hesitate to enter. Looking around you, however, you see that the rest of the grove is burning wildly, and you have nowhere else to go unless you want to burn alive. So you put on the Craven Monk's mantle and step inside. Hey guys, Alias here. I hope you liked this story. I wrote this along with AI, using AI to capture my ideas and create rough drafts that I then went back through and edited and expanded upon. This let me put my ideas on paper as I had them, and as a writer with ADHD, that is a necessary tool for me and something that I'll be utilizing, I'm sure, quite a bit more. I'll be taking what I learned from this first book and applying it to the remaining books, of which there are 4 more planned in this series, and this might become a universe depending on how well these do. I appreciate you guys hanging around this long. Thank you. I had a blast doing this, and we will get working on the next one soon. Like, comment, subscribe. It all helps. I'm a tiny channel. Goodbye.